Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling, well, a really vital question about African elections.
It's a big one.
Yeah. Are they genuinely reflecting what people want? Or is something else going on behind the scenes, manipulation?
Right. And we've been digging into quite a few reports, different analyses on this.
Exactly. Looking at electoral practices across different countries. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack all the methods, the history, maybe where things are heading.
To give you, the listener, a clearer picture of, well, a really complex situation.
Okay, let's jump in.
So I think what really jumps out from the material first is just how often these questions about fairness come up. It's not like isolated incidents.
Seems pretty persistent.
It really does. The sources point to this recurring set of challenges. We're talking about things like voter suppression.
Making it harder to vote.
Yeah, or ballot stuffing, the more, traditional methods, but also increasingly concerns about electronic systems.
The tech side, right.
Yeah.
We've definitely seen some big examples recently, haven't we?
We have.
Like Nigeria, 2023. That whole controversy around the INE servers.
The Electoral Commission servers, yeah. Big questions about whether the results transmission was, well, transparent.
In Kenya in 2022 as well. That dispute over the vote tallying, it went all the way to their Supreme Court.
It did, and the court upheld the result, but the opposition wasn't convinced at all.
So those are recent headlines, but if we
Yeah.
dig a bit deeper into specific cases...
Okay, yeah. Look at Zimbabwe, 2018. There were loads of reports alleging that the ruling party, ZANU-PF, they might have manipulated voter lists, and there were also claims about using the military sort of intimidatingly in some areas.
Which likely played a role in Mnangagwa's win. It was pretty narrow.
Many observers believe so, yes. And then you have Uganda, 2021. Ahead of that election, there were internet shutdowns, arrests of opposition figures.
Things that clearly make it hard to run a campaign.
Exactly. It stifles opposition voices, makes it hard to get their message out.
It really makes you think about the basics of a healthy democracy.
It does.
We looked at Tocqueville, who said, the quality of civic participation is key.
A good measure of democratic health.
So what happens when voting itself, that fundamental act, feels compromised? It's kind of like...
like watching a rigged game.
Yeah, like a sports match where you suspect the ref is totally biased. It just makes you lose faith in the whole thing.
And the historical angle is important here, too. This isn't entirely new.
Right, you mean post-independence.
Yeah, if you look back at some of those early elections after colonial rule ended, Ghana in 1960 under Nkrumah, for instance.
Allegations of rigging there, too.
Oh, yes, significant ones. And Kenya's 1992 election that was reportedly marked by quite a bit of violence and fraud.
So maybe these vulnerabilities, they have deeper roots.
That's what some of the analysis suggests. The legacies of colonialism, maybe institutions that weren't quite strong enough from the start.
Could have created conditions where this stuff could happen more easily.
Potentially, yes. Made the systems more vulnerable to manipulation over time.
Is there a particularly stark historical example?
Well, Nigeria's 2007 election often comes up.
Ah, yes.
The irregularities were apparently so widespread, the results seemed massively inflated for Yar'Adua. It drew a lot of criticism internationally.
That's a real contrast, though, to South Africa in '94, isn't it?
A huge contrast.
Yeah.
And the sources often point to that one as, comparatively successful.
What made the difference there, according to the analysis?
Well, things like strong international observation, a really unified approach to the transition itself, those seem to have been key factors in that specific case.
Interesting. It kind of links back to that idea, maybe from Plato, about, well, apathy.
The idea that if you're indifferent to public affairs...
you end up being governed by, well, maybe not the best people. Or the process gets corrupted.
Exactly. It raises the question, does a sense of my vote won't count anyway actually, unintentionally, allow these practices to continue?
Okay, so moving to more modern times. The methods are evolving, right? It's not just stuffing ballot boxes anymore.
Definitely not. The tech side is where things get really complex now.
Electronic voting machines, hacking concerns.
Yes. The DRC election in 2018 really highlighted those risks. Concerns about vulnerabilities in the machines themselves.
Wow.
And it's not just hacking. We still see other tactics, like biometric voter ID systems. Sometimes they mysteriously fail.
Which disenfranchises people.
Precisely. And sadly, pre-election violence is still a tool used in some places to intimidate opposition supporters.
And it's not just about the voting day itself, is it? There's the lead up, too.
Absolutely. The sources talk about how governments might use state media, give tons of positive coverage only to themselves.
Skewing the narrative.
Right. And then there are things like alleged cash handouts to voters, trying to buy support directly. Cameroon's 2018 election was mentioned in that context.
Okay, so a really important recent case study here seems to be Kenya again, but in 2017.
Yes, that was quite something. The Supreme Court actually annulled the initial presidential result.
Because of hacking.
Evidence of hacking into the Electoral Commission's system, yeah. It was unprecedented.
But then the rerun.
The rerun was boycotted by the opposition and still faced a lot of skepticism. It shows how hard it is to rebuild that trust once it's broken.
It really does. And, these aren't uniquely African problems either.
No, the sources bring up Venezuela's 2018 election as a comparison.
Where the opposition just boycotted entirely.
Yeah, believing the whole system was rigged against them from the start.
So it feels like technology is a double-edged sword here.
It absolutely can be. The idea comes up that if you had truly independent oversight, total transparency, then technology could potentially make elections fairer, secure counts, audits, that kind of thing.
But without those safeguards.
It just becomes another way to manipulate the outcome, maybe even harder to detect sometimes.
So looking forward, how do we break this cycle? What are the potential paths to fairer elections?
Well, the material we reviewed points to a few key things. Stronger institutions is a big one.
Like genuinely independent electoral commissions.
Exactly, ones with real teeth and autonomy. Also, international oversight, continued scrutiny, and support from outside.
And what about from within?
Youth activism seems really important. Younger generations demanding accountability, pushing for change, that comes up quite a bit.
Are there positive examples we can look to? Signs of progress.
Ghana's 2020 election is often mentioned.
I know that one.
Despite a very close result, the transition was peaceful. It suggests, that credible processes and outcomes are achievable. It's not all bleak.
That's good to hear. One of the sources actually sketched out these contrasting futures for Nigeria, didn't it? Say 2030.
Yeah, it was quite striking. One scenario was positive. Maybe blockchain voting gets implemented successfully.
Making fraud much harder.
Theoretically, yes.
Yeah.
Leading to a widely trusted result. But then the negative scenario...
It was pretty concerning.
Yeah, involving AI deepfakes being used to manipulate voters, maybe entrenching authoritarian rule. It shows the stakes.
It really does. High stakes. It reminds me of that Desmond Tutu quote.
About neutrality in the face of injustice.
Yeah. If you're neutral, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. It makes you think about the responsibility here.
Both for citizens within these countries and for the international community, right, to actively push for fairness.
So what's the prediction further out, say 2035?
The general sense from the material seems to be, cautious optimism mixed with realism.
Meaning?
Meaning we might see more fair elections as technology hopefully becomes more accountable and better implemented.
Right.
But rigging is likely to stick around where governance is weak, where those strong institutions just aren't there yet.
So it really brings us back full circle to that first question.
It does. Are these elections across Africa genuine choices, or are they often, performances controlled by incumbents?
And this deep dive really highlights that tension, doesn't it?
Sure.
There's real hope, real desire for democracy.
Absolutely. Side by side with some pretty cynical and deceptive manipulation tactics.
The sources seem clear, though, that ultimately the power for change
rests with the people. Their engagement, their demand for integrity, their vigilance. That's the consistent thread.
So we'll leave you, the listener, with this thought.
Yeah.
Technology. Is it going to be the savior of democratic elections in Africa, ensuring fairness?
Or could it just become a more sophisticated way to carry out the same old manipulations? Something to keep pondering.